Is a professional autism diagnosis actually worth it? Should I even bother? What can I get out of a professional autism diagnosis? If I don't seek a professional diagnosis, can I still really call myself autistic? Let's talk about all of this and so much more. Hi there, my name is Megan and welcome to Neurodivergent Magic, the YouTube channel for accessible and relatable neurodivergent content. Deciding whether or not to get a professional autism diagnosis is a huge decision. It definitely took me a little while to figure out if I was okay being self-diagnosed, if I wanted a professional diagnosis, how a professional diagnosis could actually serve me. There's a lot of questions and a lot of identity issues often wrapped up in professional autism diagnosis. So here's everything you need to know before you go get a professional autism diagnosis. First, let's talk about the reasons professional autism diagnosis is often inaccessible. There are four main barriers to professional autism diagnosis. They are financial, geographic, identity related, and research related. So first, let's talk financial. Professional autism diagnosis is very rarely covered by insurance for adults, which means you're often paying out of pocket. And even if you live in a country with universal health care, oftentimes the waitlist for a professional autism diagnosis is years long. So if you need help now, you're probably still gonna have to pay out of pocket for a private assessment. Now, when I say it's financially inaccessible, what do I mean by that? Well, I've heard of people getting a professional autism diagnosis for as little as like $350, but I've also heard about them costing as much as like $4,000. Personally, my professional autism assessment cost $650, and I personally thought that was a steal, and so I jumped on it. And the fact that I'm in a position where I can spend $650 and think of it as a steal is, not everyone's position, and I completely understand that. There's a lot of people who absolutely would benefit from a professional autism diagnosis who simply cannot afford it. The second barrier is geographic. So let's say you find an affordable, knowledgeable doctor who can provide a professional autism diagnosis, but they're like 8 hours away. Now, what was affordable can become not affordable because now you're paying for gas, you're paying for a hotel room, you may have to go back several times, and so you have to make this trip multiple times. And not only that, but it also eats into your time. And if you have a full-time job, you may have to take off work, which is even more money lost. So even if the assessment itself is affordable, the process is often not. Let's talk about barrier number 3, which is identity-related issues. So a lot of people who have identities that have been othered or just completely ignored in the medical community receive a lot of stigma, misdiagnosis, or just straight up gaslighting and dismissal from doctors when they try to seek a professional autism diagnosis. Women are often misdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and even though autism and borderline can absolutely go together, sometimes, even when we are showing clear signs of autism, we are misdiagnosed as borderline simply because we are women or female presenting. Also, I'd like to point out that studies show just as many men actually have borderline as women. It's just that men tend to seek help for borderline less often than women. Additionally, Black people may be misdiagnosed with antisocial personality disorder rather than autism. And Black children are often misdiagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder rather than autism. And sometimes if you're gender nonconforming or trans, the reverse can happen. Instead of using your gender identity to invalidate your autism, some people want to use your autism to invalidate your gender identity by saying, oh, you're autistic, you're confused, you can't possibly understand something as complicated as gender. So there's a lot of ways intersectionality can impact the professional autism diagnosis process, and frankly, make it a lot more inaccessible for the vast majority of actually autistic people. And finally, the fourth limitation is that of the research itself. Much of the autism research is based on white, middle-class, young boys. And if you don't fit those categories, it's not just that your doctor might discriminate against you. Even if your doctor is incredibly well-meaning, they have limited research to work with that is actually about you. Unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do about the lack of research, but we can do our best to find a competent doctor. If you're looking for a professional autism assessment, I really strongly recommend you check out the Neuroclastic directory of diagnosticians. This is how I found my assessor. It's how lots of people I know found their assessors. The website actually has like feedback from actually autistic people who have been through the diagnosis process with these assessors and can say like, hey, they were really good about this, or hey, I had a good experience when it comes to this. So I found that really helpful. If you're looking for a neurodivergent friendly therapist, I really recommend ndtherapists.com. This is basically a directory of neurodivergent friendly therapists in multiple countries, multiple states in the US, and it's just people who I think are actually neurodivergent themselves or are very neurodivergent affirming. If you can't find an assessor or a therapist on either of those websites and you're just kind of looking around your area at local websites, here are some red flags and green flags to look out for. Red flags would include use of the puzzle piece symbol, use of functioning label language, and promotion of ABA therapy. Green flags would include use of the infinity symbol and support needs language. So let's say you find a good doctor, you find a good assessor, you think maybe you're ready to do this, but you're kind of not sure why you're doing it. Like, what do you actually get out of a professional autism diagnosis? Number one, you can get paperwork to help you receive accommodations at work or school. Now, as a caveat, some schools and some places of employment will accommodate you without professional paperwork. Sometimes you don't even have to disclose. You can just say, hey, can I do this? And sometimes they just say yes. Other times you can disclose, but you don't need to provide medical records. But at some schools and some places of employment, you do need an actual diagnosis in order to receive the accommodations you're looking for. Number two, a professional diagnosis can help you receive disability benefits. As far as I'm aware, it's pretty much impossible to receive disability benefits without actual medical proof that you are disabled. So if you are in a position where you need to be receiving benefits, you will probably have to go through the diagnosis process. And three, a professional autism diagnosis can be incredibly validating. I'll be totally honest, that's why I got my professional diagnosis. I have a long history of obsession with different mental health diagnoses. I have a long history of diagnosis confusion and misdiagnosis. I just wanted a competent doctor to look at me and say, yes, you have this, or no, you don't. And I really just needed help understanding myself and help with the differential diagnoses. If you don't know, differential diagnosis is basically when you say, okay, it's this, but not this, or it's not this, but it is this, and being able to differentiate between similar diagnoses. Now, on the other hand, there are absolutely reasons that people might choose not to seek a professional autism diagnosis. Number one, it can be used to discriminate against you in court, especially in custody battles. Lawyers love to say that, oh, this person can't properly take care of their kids because they're autistic, they can't even really take care of themselves. This is bullshit, and I'm pretty sure technically illegal, but it flies in court all the time. Number two, some countries prohibit the immigration of autistic folks into their country because of their autism diagnosis. Again, fairly certain this is illegal in most places, but it is still common practice. And number three, doctors might see your autism diagnosis in your chart and thus treat you a little differently. They could infantilize you, they could gaslight you or dismiss you, so that's a risk you're gonna run. So after weighing the pros and cons of professional autism diagnosis, you may decide that it's not for you. So what are you supposed to do next? You really relate to this stuff. It sounds a lot like you and you need help, but professional diagnosis just isn't the route for you. What are you supposed to do? Personally, I'm a huge proponent of self-diagnosis. Neurodivergence is not an illness. It is not a disease. Autism is not a disorder. Autism is an identity and a disability. It can be accurately identified by ourselves and by our community. So it's completely okay for you to say, yeah, all of this lines up. This is who I am and how I am. And you don't have to say, I think I might be autistic, or I relate to autism, or I'm on the spectrum. You can just say, I'm autistic. You're allowed. I give you permission. And if you want to learn more about self-diagnosis and why it's so valid, go check out this video, wherever it is. So if you've recently realized that you're probably autistic and you're wondering what in the world to do next, I really encourage you to come to the Neurodivergent Lived Experience Summit. I'm going to be giving a talk called So I Think I'm Neurodivergent, Now What? Professional Diagnosis, Self-Diagnosis, and Other Next Steps. It should be really helpful for you. The link to sign up is in the description below. I'll see you there.